Hey guys, alright, we're back with another Suibhne. I don't know how to pronounce it. No, man, I'm fairly certain I say this every single time I watch his videos too. The animated history of Ireland. I might actually be able to say some things during this video, unlike some of these other animated history videos that he has done, because I know a little bit more about Ireland. Mainly because for the past year, for the past 2 semesters of school, one of my professors is a Irish history professor, mainly more modern day Ireland, like 1800s, 1900s Ireland. But he's an awesome professor, but obviously not gonna say his name. I'm not gonna say the university that I go to for obvious reasons. But yeah, he's so you can, it's fun getting him on tangents about Irish history, because that you can definitely see his passion for what he studies when he just goes off on a tangent on Irish history, because that's his thing. Whereas he had been teaching English history is what I've had him for, 2 classes of English history. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive right into the animated history of Ireland.
This episode is made possible by Audible. Stick around to see how you can use their great services to support the channel. Hopping across the English Channel, we return once again to the British Isles. This time to Ireland, land of fairies and folktales, Christians and pagans, beer and whiskey, and a somewhat troublesome history that propelled the Irish to the...
Somewhat troublesome? Somewhat? And also, yeah, okay, that is... Hold up, let's see if I can... Oh no, the flags. Which one's Ulster? I think this one's Ulster, right? Yeah, because that's the red hand. Red hand of Ulster is red-handed, the red hand, right? I think I'm right. Let's see if I'm right.
The world stage in the 1960s. But going back further, the tale gets pretty interesting. And that's certainly not a bias on our part. Welcome everyone to the Emerald Isle.
I think this music gets me copyrighted, so I'm gonna mute it. God, I just love the characters he makes. I've said that before. I think I've said it every time too. I repeat myself a lot.
Ireland as we know it today is a single island entity and has been united for almost its entirety. This only changed in the 20th century when it became split between 2 nations, Ireland the country and the United Kingdom. Most of the Emerald Isle's modern citizens did not live before the split, which is why there still tends to be some bitterness about it on both sides. But leaving that aside for the moment, we can begin in 300 BC. The first inhabitants were our good friends the Celts, who migrated from the European continent after the last ice age. These Celts flourished in culture and traditions all upon the foundations of their pagan faith. Irish myth and folklore is deep intertwined into Irish poetry and even their later Christian beliefs.
Although that doesn't mean it's easy to find. Hi, Tailbot here from the channel Tale Foundry. Unfortunately, a lot of ancient Irish traditions have been lost to time and inattention. The stories we do have records of are really cool. Men who
That is in Latin, yeah. Lorem ipsum dolor sit amet. Yeah, that's Latin.
become gods, intricate pseudo-histories, an odd abundance of shape-shifting salmon, but it's hard to know whether they're legitimate because the majority of them were recorded by Christian scribes rather than their pagan adherents. On our show, we recently took a shot at unraveling the Irish mythological cycle and the mystery of why it isn't.
I just want to say, my Gaelic right there, or Celtic, whatever language that was, that sounded pretty good in my head. It sounded pretty good to me. Just saying. Usually I mess up saying words from other languages, but to me that sounded pretty good. I hope it sounded good. Don't tell me it sounded bad. Let me feel good.
More popular. So, once you're done learning about Ireland's actual history, feel free to come discuss its pseudo-history with us.
Thanks for the contribution, Tale Foundry. The Celts of Ireland called their land Eire after their matron goddess Eiru. They spoke a language called Gaelic.
And I wonder where Tolkien got his inspiration for Eru Iluvatar. For my Tolkien nerds out there. Hey, I got you a little bit. I don't know all the names. I just know some. I don't know why I even said it.
Yeah, or what we call.
But that has to be where he got the inspiration. That has to be. At least some inspiration. I mean, I think the name is obviously the name he made derives from his own language that he created, but he obviously took a lot of inspiration on British Isles. I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent on Tolkien.
One Irish tribe, the Scotti, is thought to have been the namesake of Scotland. Once again, English misappropriation defies the boundaries of cultural sensitivities. Christianity made its way to Ireland from Rome and Britain, largely aided by the Bishop St. Patrick, who managed to convert the Irish from paganism to Catholicism when he wasn't busy chasing snakes. Ireland was raided and settled by the Vikings in the 8th century, setting up small towns that
Leinster, Meath, Munster, Connacht, Uí Neil, Oriel, Ulster, and Dalriata
became cities like Dublin and Belfast, but the Vikings were fought off and replaced by the Normans, who arrived in 1167, creating what would be the Lordship of Ireland. Norman Ireland failed to control the entire island though, and many lords and kings existed in tandem with the Norman possessions. By the 1400s, Norman holdings were limited, aided greatly by the War of the Roses and the Black Plague, which killed far more Normans than Irishmen. This changed with King Henry VIII, who took a break from...
Okay, so I'm going to hypothesize as to why the Black Death killed way more Normans than it killed Irish. The way that Ireland is set up is a very spread out country, especially in this time period. There's not much population centers. Population centers would be like Dublin and Dublin. Dublin being the biggest population center, of course. And I think one more, but I can't think of the name. But the Norman population would be living in the more rural areas. That's where they would be largely located. So, and then the Irish, of course, would be more in the rural countries where they're living fairly spread out. And you see this also in Eastern Europe, where Eastern Europeans were not too much affected by the Black Death because of the living style that they had, in which people lived pretty far out, spaced out. There were not too many sizable urban centers in Eastern Europe, like in Poland. We see Poland having a low Black Death fatality rate because of that. And I'm assuming, just based off the context there, that the same thing would happen in Ireland, whereas the Normans would be largely affected because of their social society being more urbanized, while the Irish were the farmers and they'd be out working in the fields and stuff, so that they were, and thus being further away from population centers where the Black Death spread like crazy. Over explanation.
From cutting up wives and churches to conquer the various Irish kingdoms. He established the Kingdom of Ireland, which expanded after defeating the Irish in the Desmond Rebellions and the 9 Years' War. In 1604, Ireland
the Red Hand was
under
Ulster.
English rule.
I was right.
James I of the Scottish House of Stuart became the King of England, uniting all three kingdoms under one monarch. The British, however, were Protestants, and the Catholics of Ireland felt resentment having a Protestant as their ruler, and rebellions were frequent. To gain better control, English monarchs confiscated land from the lords and farmers and replaced them with Protestant English and Scots. The British hoped that settling Protestants in the area would help quell rebellions by having a population with a distinct British national identity. This worked most successfully in Ulster, where some counties formed majorities of Presbyterians.
It worked in Ulster because Ulster was Ulster's the more I guess more settled Protestant region, right? There was already a sizable or becoming a more sizable population there, whereas the rest of Ireland here, they were pretty much putting in charge a minority instead of the majority, whereas this was a more developing region. And by developing, I mean people coming from Britain and living in this area, so they would have been more Protestant, just in general, I think. I could be wrong. I'm not too sure.
During the War of the Three Kingdoms, Ireland staged rebellions from British rule, but were defeated by both Oliver Cromwell and later William of Orange shortly after the Glorious Revolution. Theobald Wolfton led a further rebellion which was brutally suppressed. At this point, the British said enough was enough and united the kingdoms into a single country in order to better control rebellions. The union was still heavily prejudiced against Catholics though, and this...
So, what's interesting about this and what I learned from, at least what I think I learned from my professor, because I'm not in, it's been a while since I heard this from him. This was back in spring. So, don't blame him if it's wrong. Blame me for misinterpreting it. But I don't think it's wrong. The way the British treated the Irish, they pretty much treated Ireland like they did a colony. Now, of course, the treatment of Ireland would be better than the British treatment of, say, India. The treatment of Ireland would be kind of similar to that of the 13 colonies, a little bit, except a little. They were probably slightly kinder to the Americans because the Americans were Protestant, whereas the Irish are Catholic. So the Irish treatment probably a little harsher than what the Americans received, but you know.
Coupled with the Great Potato Famine caused millions to die and millions more to immigrate.
And one of the things here that's interesting about the Irish famine is they didn't actively, so it's not that the British really actively tried to kill the Irish. Now, of course, in some situations, it can definitely be interpreted and possibly even argued for sure that in certain situations there were British people in power that seemed to actively further the famine and harm the Irish. But in general, the overall scope, I would say, of the potato famine is that the British didn't do any efforts to really stop it. It's like they didn't really do any efforts to stop it, but they didn't really, in a grand scale, do anything to keep it going, right? Again, coming from what I'm remembering from my professor.
Great. Most notably for Liverpool and the Americas. The economic hardship and poverty created the Home Rule movement, in which the Irish citizens demanded their own parliament, with the notable exception of Protestant counties in the north, who were pro-unionist and supported British rule. This surprised entirely no one, since most of these counties were descendants of the British colonists, who had confiscated the Irish lands a century earlier. Home Rule stalled during World War I, leading some Republicans to stage a rebellion known as the Easter Rising. The British attempted to grant Home Rule by splitting the island into two self-governing territories, Northern and Southern Ireland, both of whom were still part of the United Kingdom. Fighting continued, however, and the Irish Civil War ensued, with some supporting membership of the British Commonwealth as a free state and others supporting a full republic. Although the Free State won the war, the Republicans did shortly get elected to Parliament and Ireland became a full republic.
Nice.
The split of Ireland angered many Republicans on both sides, who saw it as a British ploy to gerrymander the northern counties to allow for a slight unionist majority and ultimately retain a claim on parts of the island. The anger also came to further intensify the religious divide, since most Catholics saw themselves as Irish and supported republicanism, and most Protestants were pro-union. The bitterness of the Irish Civil War was felt everywhere, and discrimination against Catholics was increasing in the north. Peaceful civil rights protests escalated just one decade after the war in a conflict known as the Troubles, which is something you've probably heard of.
Oh yeah.
Various unionist and nationalist paramilitary groups were formed and the fighting continued for decades. The conflict boiled down to the Good Friday Agreement, when Ireland and Northern Ireland agreed to exist in a state of tandem, and if the majority of Northern Irish citizens voted to rejoin Ireland, the governments would allow this to happen. The agreement also affirmed the free movement of people through the border and made allowances for any Northern Irish born in Northern Ireland to attain Irish citizenship if they desire. This largely brought the conflict to an uneasy peace. Kind of. Ireland joined the European Union in 1973 along with the UK and Denmark. The island became very prosperous and economic growth became a large source of immigration. They replaced the old Irish pound with the euro in 1999. The island's prosperity was halted in the 2008 global financial crisis, which significantly reduced Ireland's wealth. Many on both sides of the border have toyed around with the idea of reunification, and some have compared the situation to the division of East and West Germany. Resistance to unification is said to be waning somewhat, even though some are still fiercely opposed. The discomfort of the
pretty extreme comparison there. I wouldn't necessarily. In some circumstances, I could see it. In others, not so much. I'd say it was a far more tense and threatening divide with the Germans than the Irish.
The division once again came to a head with the vote of Britain to leave the EU, angering many who don't want to see a border erected between the two parts of the island. The slim majority of the Northern Irish voted to remain within the EU, bringing up a degree of resentment to the UK for forcibly removing them from it. Talks about the reunification of Ireland began immediately, and the idea has shown growing support, especially with the Scottish intention on holding a second independence referendum. Some view Irish unification as inevitable as older generations pass for an increasingly more liberal world, and yet others too are skeptical. I guess only time will tell.
Okay.
This video would not be possible without...
Alright, let's go to this final picture here of Ireland. Okay. I enjoyed the video. I think this is slightly weaker than the last Suibhne video that we watched. It didn't go too much in depth about that many things. It was very brushed over history of Ireland. I would have liked him to go a little bit more in depth, as he's shown that he's done it before. He's capable of going in depth while still providing a good, speedy history, right? He's shown it before. So I think this was a little bit of a slip in my opinion, but still an amazing quality. I mean, if I had a fraction of his skill, my first history video would have been much better than it is. But yeah, I enjoyed this video. I love Suibhne. He does some great work. But yeah, that's gonna be it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.